Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Zev Bar-Eitan, who is the author of the series, which incomplete as of now, Abravanel's World of Torah, which is an English edition, essentially, of Abarbnel al Torah. So I will let him talk about this. So first of all, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. And thank you for hosting me.
Sure, my pleasure. So let's start off. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and grew up in a family that was, Baruch Hashem, affluent and modern. Went through public schools in Beverly Hills from first grade through 12th, and picked up what the Beverly Hills scene had to offer. After high school, I went to college. I graduated from a small liberal arts college in the Northwest, Portland, Oregon, where I studied English Lit. After university, I spent a little time in Israel, including a month stint in a kibbutz, and then a couple days in Yerushalayim, where I was hauled off the wall by Rabbi Meir Schuster, alav shalom, brought me to yeshiva. And that was my first introduction to Orthodoxy. It didn't last very long, like a week. I had other plans, better plans, so I thought, and continued my post-college travels to Europe, and then eventually came back to Los Angeles to work with my father, alav shalom, for in a family business. And that lasted for also a fairly short time, couple years. And then two blocks from my house, there was the Simon Wiesenthal Center, or the Menachem Begin College for Jewish Studies. And I walked in there one weekend, inspired by the few days I had at Eshet Torah in Yerushalayim, because during that interim of working in the family business post-college, I had a lot of questions and realized from that short time in yeshiva that I knew zilch about Yahadut, Judaism. And that sparked something, basically an interest or a curiosity to see what it's about. Because Rav Noach, alav shalom, before I left his office to head out to Europe, said, don't discard your Judaism before you know what you're throwing out. And that resonated with me. And so when I came back to Los Angeles, I got more active in the conservative synagogue where my family belonged. And then, like I said, shortly thereafter, walked in one Sunday to YULA, Yeshiva University of Los Angeles, and met a great staff. They're still there. And I'm sitting in Rabbi Meir May's office, and he called over one of the guys and said, "Here's a new Talmud. Why don't you take him to the base medrash and see if he can learn Chumash with Rashi?" And I said, "What with what?" And that began the journey. Back. It was a 6-week program, and during those few weeks, it just struck me so strongly that Judaism has so many of the things which interested me at that time: theology, philosophy, a foreign language, Hebrew, and commentary. And since I learned English Lit, I was familiar with examining a text. But long story short, the 6-week program led to a full year there and then a year in Israel. Later, during that year, got engaged to my wife. This will be 40 years in a few months. And we made Aliyah in summer of 1981, thinking we would try it out for a little while. So in Israel, continued my studies, and then had the good fortune of having great rebbeim at Chappelle's. I'll throw out a great word for them, Darchei Noam Chappelle's in Yerushalayim, where I met Rabbi Yitzhak Shurin, who was a Tanakh teacher at that time. Later, he would become one of my mechutanim, which is really a special bracha. My oldest son married one of his daughters. And his shiurim were just wonderful. Great explorations into Tanakh. I became very close with him. We learned one-on-one. And then his father, Rav Yisrael Shurin, made Aliyah in the mid-'80s and to Efrat, Gush Etzion. I became very close with him. I was basically his one of the Ben Bayit with him and Mishamish him for over 25 years that I cherish beyond words because of the character and the wisdom of the man. And I was very fortunate he gave me smicha. He asked me to teach in his kollel, and I began teaching Tanakh there 25 years ago. That's pretty much where I've been. And then we can talk about the Abarbnel if you have any questions until now.
No, I think that's pretty comprehensive, I'm sure, for the listeners as well. So, yeah, let's dive right into the Abarbnel. So, as you mentioned, you got into Tanakh. Now, obviously, the Abarbnel or Abravanel, I mentioned before, and I'll have to ask the obligatory which way is it, and I know the listeners, and but I think let's start with. I mean, you said you were into Tanakh, so how did you get into Abarbanel, especially in the side? You eventually will get to your work on that you're middle of now. But how did you, when and what led you exactly to the Abarbanel and how?
Okay, great. In yeshiva, the typical curriculum, at least when it comes to Tanakh, is Chumash, Rashi, some Ramban. And in those years, actually, we had Rav Nosson Kamenetsky, alav shalom, who used to give every week a Devar Torah from Midrash Rabbah. But I would say those are the big three: the Rashi, Ramban, and Midrash Rabbah, Tanhuma, and that's where I was coming from. Wonderful commentaries; they give incredible insights, of course. Then, when I began teaching Tanakh, and the first sefer I taught was Sefer Shmuel. Sefer Shmuel has some of the most disturbing narratives in all of Tanakh, starring David HaMelech, King David. And when I would prepare these shiurim, I would go through the psukim and Rashi, Radak, Mitsudot, and as continued preparation, I began learning Abarbnel. And when I got to the section of David and Bathsheba and Uriah Hitti, when I got to that section and saw how Abarbnel treated it, I was floored. I was floored by his honesty, by Abarbnel's honesty, his brashness, his fearlessness of probing David HaMelech's heart, Kevayochel, and his ma'asim. all in the backdrop in Tanakh, what the text, what the Tanakh tells us. And it was so refreshing. It was so enlightening that I decided I'm going to begin from Breshit, and I want to hear and learn what he says on Tanakh.
Now, at what point did you decide and say, okay, that you're going to work on a actual work, a translation of Abarbnel? So you got into it, but when did you decide, okay, we're going to go work on this whole project? And we'll explain in a minute what the project is exactly.
Okay. At first, it was a matter of reading his commentary. And predominantly, I was learning by myself his commentary with my pen in hand. It's hard for me to learn or read without a pen and make notes. And when I started the Chumash with Abarbnel, I simply did that. I simply made notes. If there were patterns, or there were cross references, or there were supplementary passages or verses or complementary, I would make note of it and cross reference it. Go see Amos Aleph Gimel, and this matches up, corresponds, contrasts with Sefer Malachim Aleph Gimel Dalet, sort of thing, and it took years. Obviously, undertaking. It's not something. Abarbnel does not lend itself to sitting down in an armchair and just going through. It really requires forethought. It requires yishuv adat. It requires concentration, because in those days, the commentary itself was little writing, double columned, mistakes, typos, no periods, no commas, no bullet points. Nada, really nothing. So, that's the bad news. But the good news is you have to hold cap. You have to really think about what he's saying. So that was the two-edged sword. And so, after finishing all of his Tanakh, including Haggadah Shel Pesach and his Pirkei Avot, I mean, everything he touched is golden. He doesn't need my haskama, by the way, of course, but I'm just expressing my enthusiasm and passion for his works. And then I went to Breshit after finishing everything and started translating. And then about 100 pages in, I thought maybe something's coming from this, and reached out to an excellent editor, Rabbi Doron Beckerman, who told me, I showed him a sample of the work, and he said, this is worth continuing, especially since no one had translated Abarbnel in the past. Now, that requires a comment. So after finishing his commentary, and I came to the realization that it's really a shame Abarbnel does not get his due. You're a yeshiva guy, I can tell. You live in Lakewood. So if you mention Abarbnel to anyone, they're going to tell you a joke. You know the joke? Abarbnel's great. It's something you pick up after the Cholent on Shabbos. You read all of his questions, and then you fall asleep because you don't have the koach, you don't have the strength to get to the answers. So you wake up an apikoros. And I've heard this story countless times. And then I realized, I mean, I guess I take it personal, but it's an offensive story, because to reduce Abarbnel to a story that is so, it's so offensive. It's not appropriate for someone who was truly one of the greatest commentators of all time. And to be reduced to to a little story is just a big, it does him such a disservice. And so I knew that I wanted to make Abarbnel more accessible. The question was how to do it. And for that, I needed help and great input from editors along the way.
So also, I'll pick up with a comment on what you said. There is that when you started doing this, like you said, there was no nice Abarbnel. Today, I'll just mention here for listeners that in Hebrew, there is the beautiful Chorev edition who did the whole Tanakh at this point. I mean, they used whatever manuscripts there are, mainly old, the original edition. They have sources, they have headers on the side. So it's a pleasure to read. And there are other editions, but that's the one to buy if you're going to buy a Hebrew one. It's that one. It's terrific. But when you did it, it was like you said, full of mistakes, no sources, hard. It was those two columns. I remember when I was in yeshiva, they still had it. It was terrible. So I think that was unfortunately one of his, I guess, why people didn't use it. And obviously, the other issue, what we'll get to, issue is the length. Just the sheer. He just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. It's actually, and you could talk about this also. I've learned a fair bit of Abarbnel. I enjoy it, but it's pretty, actually, you said something earlier, I do think it is pretty easy to read. At least for someone with a regular yeshiva education background and reading Rishonim, it's pretty easy. His language is not hard. Some of his contemporaries were much harder. He was pretty relatively easy. Just as a personal comment, I feel that. Now, like you said, there's a lot there, so you can't just leave it. Okay, so we got a little, I just wanted to mention that. Now, we didn't mention, I should mention here something else once I'm, saying a bit over here, is that we didn't discuss his basic background of the Abarbnel. So I actually recently did a podcast with Professor Cedric Cohen-Scally, who just wrote a new, he wrote in Hebrew a few years ago, just translated and revised into English, so people can listen to that, and you're not a historian, but I don't know if you want to, over here, say a bit about his background. You mentioned it in the works. Or we can move on with more about your work.
Very briefly, it's important to peg Abarbnel with a date. The date is he was born 1437 in Portugal, Lisbon, Portugal, that is, and in the 1480s, I believe there was some court intrigue, forced him out to go to neighboring Spain. Where again he worked up his position as Tsar, a financial minister to the king, to the nobility. 1492, of course, the infamous Gerush, expulsion from Spain. Though the king purportedly asked him to stay and guaranteed him a minion, the Abarbnel declined that dubious offer, especially in light of what Catholics were doing to his co-religionists. So he grew up in Lisbon to a very noble family, very erudite family, a family that had connections in the highest political echelons. Obviously had an extensive Jewish education, as well as classic non-Jewish education. And he didn't sit down to write his commentary as Breshit, Shemot, Vayikra. He didn't go in order. It seemed like he skipped around. He does provide us the dates when he finished it. And it's crazy how prolific and how quickly he wrote. He wrote some of these commentaries on Tanakh in weeks. In a few weeks. Obviously, he was gifted, photographic memory or not. Either he probably didn't sleep very much, and so the bio is he was a lamdan. He was a thinker. He was a very creative and talented writer. Besides having 1 foot, if not 2 feet, in the world of realpolitik, including the classical books. And then 1492, he's already older, and he is exiled. He goes to to Italy, and he dies in Venice in 1508. So the brief bio, that's a brief bio, a man that just was a polymath. He had his hand in so many interests, and apparently he excelled at whatever he touched. I do think it's important. Personally, I feel his being called a statesman or philosopher has been overstated. Because he didn't leave treaties, he didn't leave essays or discourses on that. And I'm sure he could have filled volumes on those subjects, statecraft and finance and economics. I don't have a doubt. But that's not where he chose to place his interest and priority. He was a teacher. He was a pedagogue. He wanted Jews to learn and know fundamental aspects of Torah.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's the basic bio. Like I said, if people want to hear more, I have another episode on that. Now, so let's get back to your work. So you said you learned Abarbnel, you went through it. And let's discuss a little bit your work. Why produce something in English? And let's talk about the actual work, what exactly you did, because I mean, I don't know whether people have seen it or not. It's not a literal word for word translation, because that would be volumes upon volumes based on how long you read. So talk a little bit, or a lot of it, about your work.
Okay, so Abravanel's world is going to be 9 volumes on Chumash, and Bezrat Hashem, a 10th volume on Abarbnel's introductions to Nach, which are so crucial to understanding, again, so many aspects. What I try to accomplish, and again, my goal, I'm very focused on trying to make Abarbnel accessible. Because of what he brings to the table. And what does Abarbnel bring to the table? He brings Gemara, he brings Halacha, he brings Hashkafa, he brings literally his bibliography, would run pages, because the Rashi, the Radaks, the Rambams, the Rambam, the Ran, the Kuzari, Medrash Rabbah, Tanchuma, he has it all at his fingertips. So what he brings to the table is this incredible breadth. And what he wants to do is he wants to make Seder, he wants to make order, he wants to give us fundamentals. So for example, let's talk practically. In Breshit, for example, and by the way, we should say this on the outset. Abarbnel has been translated before. What people have done is selected essays. The first time a selected essay came out, it was on Chumash, and it was 1 volume. So it was really very selected throughout the 5 books of the Torah. Since then, there's been another selected essay, this time more extensive, meaning selected essays on Breshit, Shemot, Vayikra, etc. There's even one fellow who tried to go linear, and there was a linear translation, and he did Parshat Breshit. You might want to interview him. I don't know his name offhand, but he did a linear translation of Parshat Breshit, and it came to about 800 pages. Now, that's Parshat Breshit. He's got like another 50 to go. So if you do the math, he's going to be very busy if that's the route he wants to go in. I don't know, far be it for me to say. But what I do is, and again with talented editors, given the parameter of wanting to make Abarbnel accessible, I took a lot of liberty, meaning, as far as the style is concerned, I omit all the questions. I counted all of his questions. There's about 3,000 questions Abarbnel asks on Tanakh. That's like a short count because a lot of his questions are really split into 2 and 3. So we can just call it briefly 3,000 questions. And I try to weave the question into the answer so it becomes kind of apparent to the reader. At any rate, that was one editorial change. And I did take some slack from certain readers that said, how can I leave out the questions? In fact, it's a fair criticism because his questions are so poignant and so bold and so brash that it is a shame to omit them. But again, focusing on keeping the book moving, keeping a rhythm moving. I needed to make some decisions if I didn't want this to grow well out of proportion. So what do? I sit down at my laptop and I have an open Abarbnel. Now I'm almost finished. I'm holding by Ki Tavo in Sefer Dvarim. And I write as I read and try to find contemporary language that I think our readers today would appreciate in order to show his relevance. So one of the things I get a lot is, well, who's talking? Is it Bar-Eitan or is it Abarbnel? And that's really a fair question. So when you read the books, you won't read, well, Abarbnel asks this and answers that. I put it all in his language. In other words, I try to grasp the kernel of a paragraph, of a section, the essential, and then put it in today's terms. So that's my modus operandi. That's how I operate. But I mean, there's some great translations. One in Italian. All translators are traitors, and it's true. I'm sure the Italian quip is correct that all translators are traitors because you can't. It's impossible to capture the tone, the flavor, the nuance, the words, the feel that the original will give you. So my goal would be for someone to have the original open, and if they need help, they go to the English because they'll find the format simple, meaning Bereshit, I've got first aliyah, second aliyah, third aliyah, etc. And that should provide enough reference besides plenty of footnotes. So in theory, if you want to know what Abarbnel says in Shemot 24:16, you can do that too.
Yeah, I wanted to even mention that you're not the first one to do that. There's obviously there's a Kitzur Abarbanel on the Haggadah, which is I believe published in Haggadah's Prague, which was a new edition put out a few years ago, and there's also a Kitzur Abarbanel on Avos. So that was done also a few hundred years ago. So not the first one to do this. Clearly, the Abarbanel is very long, like you said, and it's just hard to get through. Maybe that's maybe it for sure is part of the reason why people don't do it, read it and learn it. So you're trying to make it more accessible, which is nice. And obviously, you're very upfront with what you did. Like you said, you mentioned it in the books, meaning this is what it is. It's a reworked kind of work. It's not like I'm claiming this is a word for a translation and I'm making it up. You're not doing that, like you're saying. So which is great. So I guess the question is, well, first of all, do you have any examples that you wanted to? You mentioned to give over.
to give you an example of where Abarbnel is different, I say this in a qualified way. If I was to guess, I would say Rashi's commentary on Chumash is about 75 to 85% Chazal. Sometimes he paraphrases longer, sometimes shorter, but we're going to find a source in Tanchuma, we're going to find a source in Midrash Rabbah, and that's all great and fine. Right? Who am I? Katonti. I think if you look at Abarbnel, you're going to see maybe 50%, maybe lower, even 40% Chazal. Not that of course, he had the utmost respect for Chazal, but he believed in this concept of pardes, where Torah and Navi was meant to be studied along a certain methodological way, namely Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. One of my pet peeves, and I'm sorry to lecture, but I don't think, or I wonder, if we can build a strong edifice called Judaism if the foundation isn't in place. Meaning, in this context, I don't know how we could start with Sod and Remez and Drush and expect to have a solid underpinning of Torah and of Judaism and of Emunah. And so I think it's crucial to put out there that Abarbnel provides that. So you ask for examples. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. Let's just start with that. Interestingly enough, Abarbnel does not have an introduction to Bereshit, which is weird, very strange. He does have a short introduction to Shemot and the rest of the Sfarim in the Chumash. He's got his introduction to Sefer Yoshua really should have been his introduction to Bereshit. If I was reworking, if I was editing his works, I would put that up front. What does Abarbnel start with? He wants to tell us about how God acts in the world. Barat Shamayim v'et haaretz. Shamayim are those heavenly facilitators, or malachim, which do God's bidding here on earth, or in the among the heavens. And he launches into an in-depth discussion about the role of malachim, the role of angels. In fact, he does this throughout his Tanakh. Several occasions he'll talk about what exactly was a Tanakh. What was a malach, and a seraph, and an ofanim, and all these things. And it comes up in Yeshayahu. He's got a huge piece in Sefer Yeshayahu. But it's so, this is classic. He wants us to know how things work, how things on earth work, and how God works in Shemayim. And he talks about, so that's one example, but then he explains each and every word. And it's a very lengthy piece, actually. He's got like a few dozen questions just on the first few psukim. I'm sorry to ramble. When he describes the avot, for example, Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov, he really provides a picture, a portrait that I didn't see in other Rishonim. And it's so important. I'll give you an example. Like Akedat Yitzchak, we talk about epistemology. It's the philosophical branch of knowledge. How do we know things? How do we know that this knowledge is accurate or not? And Abarbnel concludes that prophecy is the very highest level of knowledge. And he brings it from Avraham. If Avraham didn't believe that what he was receiving was prophecy from God, he would never have gone on his way to sacrifice Yitzchak. You don't do that. If you think it's a reaction or maybe to a meal he had the day before, or he had certain troubles and caused him a nightmare or a dream that was so grotesque, if you don't believe that God communicates with man, then you don't take your son to Har Moriah to slaughter him. You don't do that. Not to mention belief in Tchiyat HaMetim. So, Derech Hagav, Abarbnel paints the forest and the trees, because besides a verse-by-verse commentary, when you least expect it, he's going to throw out a mini essay at you. So, Yitzchak, for example, Yitzchak with blessings. When he came to give a blessing to Esav, it turned out that Yaakov stole it. He'll launch into an essay based on classic Latin, Greek sources about the philosophy or the role of dreams in man's consciousness, and it's a very nice, important piece. But by the way, this is also something which floored me when I started looking through Abarbnel. When he quotes Plato and Aristotle, he has the utmost respect for them. He calls Plato Apolton Eloki, the saintly Plato, and Aristo Eloki, the saintly or godly Aristotle. Now, that's an open-minded person. It's wild. And so when he gets to, and that's just how he explores Yaakov. Yaakov was swindled by Lavan. He marries, he thought he was getting Rachel, and he gets Leah. And then we see, you ask anyone, it says Hashem saw that Leah was snua. Leah was hated. And that's a strong word, right? Very emotive, strong word. You ask a Jew on the street, who hated her? If you look at Rashi finesses it in a nice way. But Abarbnel doesn't shy away from saying Yaakov hated Leah. He hated Leah. Now we got trouble with that. Like, how does an Av hate a matriarch? How does that happen? It's like doesn't sound good. The visuals aren't right, and yet the Torah is pretty explicit. But then what Abarbnel does is he shows how each kid sheds a little bit of that animosity that Yaakov holds for his wife Leah. So Reuven is, for example, he saw. So if people were to watch the couple Yaakov and Leah in public, after Reuven was born, the first son, that layer of bad visual was reduced. And then Shimon came, which means, according to Abarbnel, that if someone would listen in on a conversation between Yaakov and Leah, he would hear the tone wasn't as acerbic, it wasn't as biting as it had been originally, until the rest of the kids, and the marriage actually became a wonderful marriage. But Abarbnel's not frightened to say it started off on a very rocky footing. It was touch and go. And I think we lose so much when we just say the avot word tzaddikim and the imahot word tzaddikiyot, tzadkaniot. We lose that process which is so crucial to work through. To me, it doesn't compromise Yaakov. It shows this was a religious personality. To grapple with feelings and subdue them.
Yeah, there's a Rav Shimshon Hirsch talks about on Lech Lecha, on Ram Avinu. He talks about the Avos and the stories, and people can look there. It's similar to what you're really referencing. But yeah, that Abarbnel, I mean, I like I said, I haven't gone through to the extent that you have, but the part that I've gone through exactly, he really gives you the pshat in the psukim, but he gives the pshat in the story. He gives you the hashkafa. He really goes through. It's extremely thorough, but like I said, it does require time. So essentially, you made this English reworked, whatever we'll call it, edition, where now it's more accessible. So the couple of examples that you gave, and without going back over them, so you're not going to translate those stories, for example, word for word, but you're going to have the basic, like I said, those thoughts and written in contemporary English. That's, if I'm getting the point, and the listeners, I'm trying to understand. That's essentially what you're doing.
I'm going to convey those major ideas, the struggles. Just to give you one more example, I know it's important to always get back to the text. On Pesach, we're interviewing this, where this interview is taking place the week of Pesach. And we're going to be reading the Haggadah very soon. One of the things Abarbnel says about Pesach, and Korban Pesach specifically, is we need to look at the greater context of the holiday. It's going to be the middle of Chodesh Nisan. Now, in agricultural society, when I'm in Eretz Yisrael right now, and I can look out in the fields of surrounding fields of Shalavim, and I see that trees are in blossom. The fields are green, which means they're far from ripe sheaves to be picked. Everything right now is in the works. So Abarbnel says Pesach is different than Shavuot and Sukkot. On Pesach, a farmer doesn't have the head to stay in Yerushalayim with all of its Ruach HaKodesh, with all of its Shekhinah and all of its beauty and splendor and the inspiration of the Kohanim and the Leviim and the Beit HaMikdash. Still in all, a Jew, a farmer, doesn't have the head to spend more than one day in Yerushalayim. He brings the Korban Pesach, he has Yom Tov, and as soon as he makes Havdalah, he goes home. He's got stuff on his head. He's got fields to work. He's not in the mood. Shavuot lasts for one day. Same idea, even though there was extra days of Korban Chagiga and etc. But the idea was the Torah doesn't make man go against his very nature and stay back in Yerushalayim because it will be lost on him. The farmer's too distracted. Sukkot, when everything is done, the granaries are filled, whatever's going to grow is grown, whatever's to be harvested has been harvested, then a man can sit back an entire week and enjoy all that Yerushalayim has to offer. But Pesach, it's a different thing. One day, that's it, you're gone, go home.
Very nice. So again, so like you said, okay, you said you put the basic overall idea, reworked, etc. So let me ask you two questions as we wind down. Is number one, they're kind of similar. Is really you? I'll give it both. You can see how you want to tackle it. But who is your intended audience you're having in mind when you're doing this? And number two is, it really goes hand in hand. Why do you think Abarbnel is so important that we should make it more accessible? Like you said, people can still read the original, and they should, but make it more accessible. Why is it so important, do you think, for people to read it today? I don't know if those are two questions or they kind of go together. So, yeah.
Okay. My target audience is anyone who really wants to better understand Tanakh, if someone wants to get a thorough, comprehensive understanding of what the Bible has to offer, Abarbnel's your man. Abarbnel's your man. Because, as I said, he comes to the table with so much. He's so broad. He's so intellectual. And it's food for thought. It teaches us about ourselves, about how we're supposed to relate to Hashem, to the angels, to our world, to our lives. It gives us such important markers, just wonderful life lessons, small and large. So accessible. The idea was to make it accessible to anyone who's a Bible fan, who wants to understand religion, understand Judaism. And he's worth reading. He's worth toiling and studying, because he is a breath of fresh air, even though he wrote 500 years ago. What do I mean? I mean that his questions are so penetrating. He doesn't hold back. Any question, all questions are welcome. He's not afraid of a question. He's not even afraid of what people today are concerned with, conflict of religion and science. When Abarbnel talks about the Mishkan, he has a whole mini essay on science and how he applies knowledge of then science to the Mishkan and the different vessels and the different important fixtures to the tabernacle. And he says, incredible what he says. He says, this is just what based on science today. But I know one thing, science will change tomorrow, and it will only improve our understanding of Torah. It's so refreshing to know that he's not intimidated. He's not threatened by anything the modern world will throw out, because he knows that God created a simple, harmonious world. And everything we know, all knowledge that we accumulate over the decades and centuries, millennia, it just will help us better appreciate the depth, the profundity of Tanakh. So these messages are so important for modern readers today to know there are no threats from the modern world. The better we know Tanakh, and I'll put in the sentence, with great commentators, including but not limited to Abarbnel, the better we understand what God is communicating to each and every one of us. And I'll leave it at that.
Yep. Oh, very nice. So as we finish up over here, first of all, I will include the link where people can get the book. It's the website. I'll include the link is Abravanel's Even though we've been calling it Abarbnel, you wrote it Abravanel. It's both ways. So that's what it says on the website, and you can order it there. And they are available in various farm stores and online. So let's just let the listeners know how many volumes already are there, and which ones were printed, and when do you envision more? When are more going to come out?
Okay. So this has been a wonderful personal project for me, because I get to hang out with Abarbnel, which is a treat beyond words. Writing and translating his works. Today there's Breshit, one volume called Theory of Moral Evolution. And if I was to summarize that long book in 3 sentences, I would say it is the moral evolution of how man became capable of receiving prophecy and leading up to the moment of Mount Sinai when an entire nation became capable of listening to the Aseret Dibrot, the Ten Commandments. You don't get there. You can't make a baby in 4 months. And you can't get to Har Sinai if there wasn't Adam and Shet and Enosh and Canaan and Mahalalel, the 10 greats leading up to Noah. And then those 10 greats, Noah, Shem, Aver, Peleg, leading up to Avram. It's a natural process. You can't skip stages. And so Abarbnel says in so many words, Breshit preps us for a nation that will be a nation of prophets. That's the first book that's in print. The second one is Shemot, Volume 1, Sinai Rules. The focus, of course, is Har Sinai and what exactly Moshe heard. How did he hear it? That really takes us to the prophecy, and that's a subject which Abarbnel laces throughout his writings. Is what is prophecy? How did it work? And how is Moshe different than all other prophets? So we get that in the first volume of Shemot. Shemot volume 2 is assembled at Sinai, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And as I said a few minutes earlier, what are the vessels? What do they represent? What do they do? What's the functionality of it? The function of the Kohanim. And then the next volume, I'm going in order, obviously, is Vayikra volume 1, the meat of the matter. And that's top heavy on sacrifices. Incredible, important topic, because there's so much misunderstanding about what a korban is and what it's not. There's a huge disagreement between the Rambam and the Ramban. Abarbnel loves to, at times, synthesize between opposing opinions and find a middle ground which works beautifully, to my thinking. And so about korbanot, sacrifices, and what opportunities they allow us. So we have so much to gain by having a mikdash and the opportunity for sacrifices. And that's lost. It's really a shame we don't have the mikdash. And obviously we all pray for its speedy arrival. Okay, then Vayikra volume 2 is a certain calling, and that brings in, that covers the last 5 parshiyot of Sefer Vayikra, Kedoshim specifically, but also the Chagim, the holidays, very in-depth discussion on the holidays, different aspects, why the length of the holidays, and in the works are Bamidbar 1, Bamidbar 2, Devarim 1, and I hope to finish my manuscript for Devarim 2 sometime this year. Time frame. I hope to get Bamidbar 1 out this before Hanukkah, and then every year after that, God willing.
Okay, sounds very good. Thank you very much for joining me. Like I said, I will include the link where people can check it out and be able to order it. And thank you.
You're welcome. And I really appreciate this opportunity to speak about something I feel so passionately about. Hag Kasher v'Sameach.
Thank you. Be well.